Here we are, back once again with the Art of Conversation Radio, this time, for the first time, recording live in the classroom with a studio audience. As you can see, they love this class, and you too could enjoy it by registering for Honors 211, The Art of Conversation, in your course catalog. Now, today we are recording live from class because we have a special guest, Dr. Peter Doerschler, a professor of political science and director of Eileen G. Jones Honors College. So we're very happy to have Dr. Doerschler with us, and we appreciate him taking the time. Dr. Doerschler, welcome to the show.
I am very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Now, our content today is tied to the date, because either this week or last week, I'm not sure precisely when, we passed the 100th day of the second Trump administration. And for whatever reason, journalists, political scientists, pundits are interested in the first 100 days of a presidential administration. Can you explain to us why that benchmark is significant?
Yeah, I think 100 days signifies a honeymoon period in any relationship, and including a political relationship with a new president. It's the time when a president attempts to get as much done as they possibly can during a honeymoon period, when they know that they still have a lot, like broad public support, and the people are going to give the president a lot of leeway, a lot of wiggle room, give them the benefit of the doubt, that their policies are the policies that the president pursues are the policies that they were elected on. And so, yeah, a president's going to take advantage of that, figure out how to utilize public opinion support, but also support in Congress to the extent that exists, to get as much done as they can while they still are in that honeymoon period. Over time, what we see in public opinion polls is that any president's support is going to start to dip. Just a question of when. And at what point, and what are the factors, and what has the president done? Might be the first scandal either they've created or somebody in their administration. It could be that the economy hits a rough point. It could be that there's a conflict abroad. Something will drag the president and maybe members of their administration kind of into the muck. And at that point, people begin to sour on a president. And especially independents who were weighing other options, they might begin to have buyer's remorse and think that the other candidates would have been better option for them. So knowing this ahead of time, I think presidents, once they're elected in November, they've got a couple of months to line everything up, so to say, line up all the ducks, all the executive orders, all the ideas, like they want to implement shotgun approach, basically ram it through as much as they can before things turn on them.
You had shared with us an article from the Pew Research Center that had a graph of presidential approval ratings across their term of office. Like you mentioned, almost all of them start relatively high and then go into immediate decline. The one exception being George W. Bush, who after 9/11 saw his approval rating skyrocket overnight from somewhere in the 40s to somewhere in the 90s as the country kind of rallied around the flag, so to speak. According to that piece, President Trump's approval rating stands as of April 23rd at 40%, and his disapproval rating stands at 59%. How does this compare to past presidents? Is it unusual?
It is unusual at this point in time. Like you said, there will be a crest and there will be a slow decline, but that usually doesn't happen in the first 100 days. It may happen soon after that, once the effects of the new policies start to take effect and people begin to have that buyer's remorse. But I'd say during those first 100 days, again, you're in that honeymoon period, you're in that sweet spot. Presidents are able to ride the goodwill for quite a while. So to see a significant drop is fairly uncommon, and I think the extent of the drop that we've seen with President Trump and his second administration has been unprecedented. If you look back, at least in the modern era of presidents, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to his agenda and what he's trying to do. He's been very aggressive with executive orders and a number of policies and actions that have been quite controversial. You know, people that were on the fence or decided to support him as independents, right, are weighing that decision sooner than they would otherwise, I think. And the goodwill may be broken with certain people. And I don't think that's affected the base as much. I think the base still is fairly consistent. If you look into kind of Republican support, there may be some erosion, but it's largely among the independents that have a good chunk of them have shifted over to a disapproval, or at least they have a lot of questions of what he's doing.
It looked to me, and I was just looking at the graph, like the Trump approval rating from the second term and the first so far are actually tracking pretty closely on top of each other compared to the other lines that were on that graph. Did you do the compare and contrast between the two first 100 days?
I haven't, done any sort of rigorous analysis about that. A lot of people are comparing the two. I mean, obviously it's the same president, a controversial figure, whether you like him or not. I think with the second administration, there's been a break from the first administration. A lot of people are talking about the first administration being more a difference in degree, that Trump is sort of a typical president in a lot of ways. He just kind of differs in the degree that he's addressing topics. Whereas the second administration, a lot of people are talking about a difference in kind. He's not just pushing the boundaries a little bit here and there, but he's breaking boundaries. He's testing guardrails. He's doing things that no other president has attempted before. And so while you may see the public opinion moving in a similar direction, I think there are fundamental differences between the two administrations.
One more question about the polling, and then we'll get into maybe some of the policies. The poll notes that when controlling for partisanship, we can see large and I think predictable disagreement based on voter registration, in that 75% of Republicans approve of Trump's job performance, while 93% of Democrats disapprove. How do ingrained party loyalties complicate our effort to discern the general public opinion?
I mean, public opinion numbers need to be unpacked. The overall percentage is only going to tell you so much. Once you do look into partisanship and age and region and a number of other kind of socio-demographic or environmental factors, you're going to see sort of the underlying shifts and possible erosion that maybe the overall trends hide or mask to some degree. So yeah, while Trump may be at a 40% approval overall, as I mentioned just a minute ago, and your number confirms that, 75% of Republicans are still on board. They may be mulling things over, they may have questions, but they're not willing to abandon ship, at least not yet. I think that's probably important to the Trump administration and to those in the White House and behind the scenes, because they need that level of support to continue if they're going to have the goodwill of Congress, controlled by Republicans, right? They need Republicans on board. And so far, Congress has been very supportive, compliant, not getting in the way, not really serving as a check and balance to President Trump, kind of a rubber stamp, more or less, as you might expect with the same party in power. But I think we're beginning to see like little cracks, little fissures in some of the things Trump is saying, where Republicans, individuals at this point, there hasn't been a mass uprising or anything like that, but individuals standing up and disagreeing politely in public, which is a pretty big deal because when that happens, behind the scenes, they're disagreeing a lot more vociferously. They've got internal discussions going about the direction of tariffs or annexing Greenland or any number of things that seem preposterous, different, rule-breaking in a lot of different ways. So in the first 100 days for that to happen, when you're supposed to be in the honeymoon period and have all this goodwill and have members of your own party pop up and begin to question very subtly, even while that base of support remains fairly stable, I would think, give the Trump administration some pause for concern. Whether or not that's going to change their trajectory and their policies, that remains to be seen.
The news coming out of the Trump administration the first 100 days has been kind of like a fire hose. I mean, there's just new stuff every single day that people on news networks and in newspapers are talking about. And so it can be kind of overwhelming to keep up with it all. I just pulled out, a few things here that I wanted to get your response to or your take on. And the first one has to do with executive orders, because I think for a lot of people, it's a little fuzzy what precisely an executive order is and what exactly they are capable of achieving or not achieving, as well as whether or not it's normal to sign so many of them. So just some data that I was collecting here this morning. So far in 2025, President Trump has signed 143 executive orders, and this is compared to 24 executive orders that he signed in his first 100 days last time around. In fact, in 2025, he signed 26 executive orders on his first day in office, which again is compared with 24 that were signed over his first 100 days in office during his first term. 120 of these are currently facing legal challenges, and 9 of them have been blocked by judges. So, like you mentioned, critics accuse the president of trying to exercise powers that his office does not have, of bypassing Congress and trying to rule by executive order, essentially. I'd like to get it from you, though. I mean, what is an executive order? How much can an executive order legally achieve? And do you think criticism of the way Trump has been using them so far is fair?
Yeah, so a executive order is when the president makes a decision to do something within existing law. So he can't write the laws, but taking existing laws, he can offer changes to those. And a good one is a good example is within Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. There are laws governing pollution. And what constitutes pollution? That's a question that can be open for interpretation. So it's usually an effort by the executive to reinterpret an existing law. And so executive orders have increased over time. And if you go back decades, they were rarely, if ever, used. And really, Congress was left to write the laws. The executive branch would execute or carry those out. But as Congress has become less and less effective in addressing a whole host of different issues that we're faced with, I think various executives from both parties have taken it upon themselves to fill in the gap, pick up the baton where Congress seems inactive or unwilling or kind of impotent. It can't move. It's sort of become stagnant. And a lot of that is polarization, and a lot of that is the way that our institutions are set up, where we have many what we call veto players in our political institutions, such as the filibuster. Such a high hurdle to have 60 senators vote to approve a piece of legislation. So when that has gummed up the works, so to say, and Congress can't act on all sorts of important issues, the executive steps in and issues these executive orders. And so, they've increased over time. So Trump is not unlike his predecessors in that respect, at least the recent predecessors. Biden did it, Obama did it too. In their first 100 days in office, they issued a fairly large number, at least historically speaking, large number of executive orders. I think the difference here is, again, not the degree so much, but certainly he's issued many, but the kind of executive orders, sort of challenging a lot of existing laws. A lot of them, with an air of retribution, going after political enemies, pardoning the January 6th Capitol rioters, things like that are rule-breaking, norm-breaking, that in some cases I think have called into question sort of the constitutionality, not just of executive orders and their function within our political system, but whether certain executive orders by Trump are in fact legal. And that's where you see courts stepping in and issuing injunctions, pausing these executive orders from fully taking effect.
This class has quite a focus on climate change because we are interested in living in this particular moment in history in the Great Acceleration. And it seems worth noting to me that 20 of Trump's executive orders have been geared specifically towards rolling back climate change policies that were enacted during the Biden administration, and in some cases to boost domestic fossil fuel production, like coal in particular. What do you make of the politics of this, that we had one presidency that was so committed to addressing climate change and the next one that seems to be committed to undoing all of that work?
Well, I'd say, first of all, it gets partly to some of the frustrations that many of you expressed during the attendance go-around, that you have a negative view of politics, or it's depressing, or you can only take so much. And a lot of it's this back and forth being yanked around. One day we have something in place, and the next day we have something else in place. And it's dizzying and it's frustrating. It can be really aggravating to kind of try to follow this and care about politics. But I'm sorry, can you get back to the core question?
The core question was like, maybe how does the Trump administration think about the politics of climate change? It seems to be pretty diametrically opposed to the Biden administration's approach.
I think that there are special interests at work here, coal and oil industries and special interest groups that figure that they're going to benefit from a strong relationship with President Trump. They gave to his campaign. He promised to bring back coal or to drill baby drill, or you can probably remember some of his other expressions that were definitely cueing to these interests out there that he was going to support them, that they were going to be core bases of support for him too, largely in rural, more western states, coal producing states. And Pennsylvania is a great example where while we have little coal industry left, there's enough there, and there's enough of the lingering culture around the coal region and places around here where that's an important part of people's culture. So when they hear those things, that's Trump speaks to them, speaks their language, speaks to their interests, even if it's not a realistic economic endeavor, we're not going to be doing tons of coal mining in this country anymore, especially deep mining. That's just not. The coal's not there, number one. Most of the anthracite coal in this particular area is gone anyways. It's much more of a strategy, I think, to appeal to certain groups of the electorate who are hanging on to these ideas of a past that's important to them. And it's a society that's moving very quickly in a different direction.
So far, much of the 100 days of the Trump administration has been dominated by discussion about tariffs. And this, too, I think is something that most of us heard the term. We have a general sense of what a tariff is, but maybe are not super well versed in the particulars. It seemed like the tariffs were placed into effect or were threatened to be placed into effect. And then the stock market started to crater, and then some of them were rolled back. Some of them were left in place. I find it all kind of dizzying and difficult to keep track of. Can you tell us anything about tariffs and the role they play in the political process so far in this administration?
Yeah, interesting. I'm certainly not an economist, so I can't deep dive into the economic effects, but I think on the surface, kind of a layperson's understanding of a tariff is that it is a form of a tax. And when imports come into this country, if there's a 25% tariff placed on them, that's going to raise the price of that good probably close to 25%, right? The importer will just pass on the cost of that good to consumers. So we should expect to see significant increase in price of a number of different goods. And cars is a great example because a lot of the parts or components of an automobile are manufactured here, Mexico, Canada, and as those components are built, they can travel across country lines back and forth a number of different times, and so the tariff would multiply and be added each and every time. So on the surface level, tariffs are not good for consumers. It's going to likely raise inflation, and we haven't quite seen the real effects of them yet. I think if you're reading sort of the economic forecasts and outlook, it's going to be within the next month or two. Like we're just starting to see a trickle effect, maybe, right? But a lot of businesses, knowing this was coming, hoarded supplies. They purchased large orders in advance. And that's why we saw a little bump in the economy or, pretty stable overall economic forecasts for now, even though there was a slight dip in GDP. But otherwise, like unemployment rates and inflation rates, right, we're holding fairly steady. I think the outlook is in the next month or two. As there's a shortage of goods, and because of the price increase, it's going to wreak havoc on small business owners in particular who depend on an imported good of some kind, an engine for a car or any number of components. So it's going to be very difficult. So what are the politics behind that? I think, according to Trump, it would be to build back an industrial base in the United States and to appeal to working class Americans who, if not this generation, the previous generation or two, whose family members worked in sort of traditional labor, blue-collar, working-class jobs in the factories, in the mines. Like, he's talked recently about wanting to bring back the jobs where once you have that job, you know you're going to keep that job for 30, 40 years, right, until you retire. And that's the kind of job that your grandparents might have had. And that stability, the good old days, the leave it to beaver sort of lifestyle that we have a hard time imagining anymore in a global economy where you know that once you graduate from here, you're probably going to be changing jobs 3, 4, 5 times. And a lot of it's skill-based, and job market's going to be very fluid and volatile. So I think there's this appeal, like visceral appeal to people to bring back the kind of jobs that offer stability and continuity and traditional lifestyle, where after work you can go out and watch your kids play, Little League. That's the kind of thing that I think he's trying to sell you on that vision. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that vision, except it doesn't really fit where we are anymore as an economy. I don't think you can bring back those jobs. And I think most economists will tell you that those jobs are gone, the vast majority of them. Maybe we can lament a little bit about that, but we also have a lot of very good jobs that have replaced them. Who wants to work in a mine anymore? Who wants to work in a dirty factory? Not to say that I certainly respect people who did those jobs. We all did. But I think the idea of especially going to college, getting an education, trying to plug yourself into the global economy where skills matter, science matters, data matters, all these things that you're doing and you're learning here that really have nothing to do with this old way of life. So I think it's an appealing vision to certain people, for sure. The working class, right, that have turned from the Democrats to the Republicans within just a couple of elections. Whether Trump can rebuild this industrial base, I think, again, most economists are very, very skeptical, partly because what percentage of our jobs are even industrial? It's about 4%. Once you take away people in factories that are part of human resources and managers, it's people on the factory floor are about 4%. And most factories have become automated too. You look in a card factory today, it's not like rows and rows of people screwing in bolts, right? It's robots. So bringing back those types of jobs to do what? They don't exist in large part. So it's a vision that has, I think, some serious problems in trying to realize it. And is taking us backward really the way to go when we're competing against Europe and China and other places, right? Do we want to be making T-shirts, or do we want to be competing with AI and biotech and things like that? And if so, why are we cutting funding to universities and to the NIH and to the NHF and to government and nonprofit institutions that are promoting and funding this kind of stuff?
Another big element of the first 100 days so far is concerned immigration. Obviously, Trump ran for office on a promise to shore up the southern border and deport people who are in the United States without documentation. And it's taken some kind of odd forms. I mean, a lot of people getting deported to their home countries. Increasingly, though, a lot of people being deported directly to El Salvadoran prisons. And that has raised questions about due process, whether or not these folks are entitled to lawyers and hearings and to work their way through the system, or if they can be shuttled kind of directly onto airplanes. And the Supreme Court has weighed in on this. That has raised the specter kind of a constitutional crisis, a collision of the different branches of the government. What do you make so far of the discourse around deportation and the Trump administration's policy?
It's no different than the tariffs, honestly. It's part of the vision, the strategy, the appeal to a lot of people who are concerned about stable jobs. They're also concerned about immigrants taking jobs and immigrants being a source of crime and instability in society. So I think they're part of the same package in some ways, at least the way a lot of people would see them. And certainly there was some level of border crisis under the Biden administration where we did have a mass influx of immigrants into this country. I think that certainly stoked the fears of who was coming in and what they were bringing in and so forth. So, yeah, I think when you look at the public opinion right now, there's still, of all the issues out there, from what I've seen, immigration still gets the greatest amount of support, that the Trump administration is sort of maybe doing the right thing. Even though the numbers are sinking, that seems to be an area where maybe He can continue to promote ideas and be okay. The economy a little bit less so. And then other issues really have tanked. The mass deportation has certainly raised, as you said, a specter of fear and possible constitutional crisis. And a lot of scholars will debate whether or not we have actually hit that or not. I tend to think that we probably have crossed that line because we have had a Supreme Court weigh in that the Trump administration had mistakenly deported Abrego Garcia, who was a legally protected resident here in the United States, to an El Salvadoran prison, and had mistakenly done that. I mean, had admitted administrative mistake in doing that. And the Supreme Court said, his due process was violated. He didn't get a chance to go before a judge or a hearing or show evidence. And the Trump administration claims that, he's a member of MS-13, a group that's now deemed a terrorist organization, and he has links to that group. But so far, we haven't seen any evidence of that. And I guess if you believe it, you have to just take the administration at its word. No real concrete evidence has emerged about that. But in the meantime, this individual, Abrego Garcia, is holed up in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court has said, you have to facilitate, in the language of the Supreme Court, his return. You got to work with El Salvador to get him back here and at least go through the due process that's afforded every resident, not just citizen, in this country, as per the Fifth Amendment. And so there are plenty of legal scholars out there who say, well, I'm not talking about this individual specifically, right? I mean, maybe he does turn out to be a member of a gang or something. That's possible. But the problem is he wasn't given due process. And if you take that right away from one individual, what's to say the administration can't take that right away from others, including you and me? I mean, where does it actually stop? It's a slippery slope once you go down it. And I think that's the constitutional crisis. That's the line we've crossed. The administration has not followed through on the Supreme Court's request to facilitate this individual's return to the United States, to go through the due process. So we're at a standstill. And in fact, the administration has said they have no plans to really help in that effort. So I think that should worry every single person, whether you care about Abrego Garcia or not, whether you think he was in a gang or not, right? I think is kind of at the end of the day immaterial. It's about the process. And that's what democracies are all about. It's about norms and processes and a constitution that guarantees certain rights to all individuals, or in some case, citizens.
We should just note, too, that Supreme Court order was a 9-0 decision, which is kind of unusual at this point in the particular composition of the court. I want to ask one more question before we take a break here and then get to the questions from the group, and that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think next to tariffs and deportations, Trump's focus on DEI programs at universities and in other places has been kind of a centerpiece of the administration so far. And I'm curious to get your take on the matter. Why this focus on DEI?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think personally it has a lot to do with scapegoating. I think trying to find groups to blame for problems. One thing you'll notice about Trump himself personally, he never takes blame for anything. Have you ever heard him say, hey, it was my fault, or bad policy, or, there's always a scapegoat. There's always somebody else to blame. And in this case, I think blaming a set of policies, I think, is one way to think of DEI, right? That have sort of changed the landscape of institutions like universities and the workplace, right? With an attempt to give more rights, more equity, more opportunities to marginalized groups in society. Take the military, for example, because that has become front and center with Pete Hegseth as our Secretary of Defense, right? Going after women in the military, transgender people in the military, and so on, right? That these people are responsible for the erosion of our military. And there's no evidence for that I've ever seen. But by scapegoating people, you have an out, you have an excuse, a ready-made excuse for why something maybe doesn't work as well as it can. And then you can change it, right? And why do you change it? To reward your friends. And I think that's what this administration is aiming to do. There's certainly an effort to reward friends and family. There's a lot of nepotism and corruption And I think that's ultimately what's at play with tariffs too, right? If you have to make a trade deal with Trump, what are you going to give him in return? What are you going to give his family? Are you going to let him build a golf course in your country? That's what's at stake at all of this.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back here with more of Dr. Doerschler, as well as questions from our in-class audience.